So I've just been watching Froch Groves 1. This was a famous boxing match that took place in the UK in Manchester at the end of last year. These two guys, super middleweights, have subsequently had a rematch, and their rivalry, there's a lot of things that have went on behind the scenes. A lot of sort of hype, a lot of mudslinging, and two huge fights in terms of the publicity they got. It's unparalleled since the days of Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn, and arguably even bigger. In fact, arguably this is the biggest boxing rivalry in British history, if you go by the fact that in the second fight, which was earlier this year in Wembley, 80,000 people turned out. That's a staggering amount of people for a boxing match. To put that in context, that is more than most football matches. Now, I already made a video about that. But this particular video, I want to talk a bit about the controversy of the first fight. And just to be clear, this isn't for shit stirring. I have a lot of respect for both men, so it's nothing to do with bias towards one fighter or the other. This is actually, if anything, a video in favour of the referee. And there's a few points I would like to make about this. Now, the first, apologies by the way, I've got a mouth ulcer, it's a little bit hard to talk, but I do think it's important to make this video. In the first fight, that ended controversially when the referee stopped the contest. Towards the end, it wasn't the full 12 rounds, but it was towards the end of the fight. I believe it was the 9th round, I don't know exactly, but basically it had been a very good fight, so this wasn't like a first round stoppage or something. It had been a pretty good fight, a pretty explosive fight, and I think the fans can't complain. I think they got their money's worth. Anyway, the referee saw at this point that Froch was getting a lot of shots that were unanswered, which in boxing terms basically means one fighter is throwing punches, the other fighter is defending, and just not throwing anything back. Now, one thing that I think fans need to recognise and accept is that the referee is closer to anybody in a boxing match. He will see more than anyone else will. Even the cornermen won't see as much, because nobody is as close to the fighters as the referee. They call him the third man in the ring for a reason. And quite frankly, it must be one of the toughest jobs. The same applies to football referees, but to be a referee in that sort of professional sports contest is... I think people hugely underestimate what sort of stamina that actually takes. I mean, of course, all due credit to the boxers, but that is often acknowledged. But what isn't often acknowledged is the sort of stamina and mental strength that referees need. And I think this is a prime example. Now, when the referee stopped this contest, it was hugely unpopular. It was, I think it was a relatively balanced crowd, but at the end it was definitely more pro-Groves. And Carl Froch was met with boos as he left the stadium. He'd won the fight by that technicality, but he was met with boos. Clearly it was a pro-Groves crowd at that point. And the decision was hugely controversial, and the referee was met with some real vitriol. I mean, you could see it at ringside. If you watch the video, you'll see there's some blokes at the side, really, some women as well, just really, you can't hear exactly what they're saying, but you can imagine it. Now, there's a few points I would like to make. Number one, referees are human. They can make mistakes. To expect a referee to be absolutely 100% accurate is a bit unfair. That's like expecting a boxer to be absolutely 100% a perfect boxer, or a trainer to be a perfect trainer, or a manager to be a perfect manager. So expecting a referee to be 100% perfect is unfair. People hugely underestimate the task that these guys have, because what they have there is a situation where they have two men who are competing for a title, who are basically throwing bombs at each other, and they essentially have these guys' lives in their hands. If you think that's an exaggeration, consider the number of boxers who have been seriously paralysed, or in some cases even killed in the ring. So it's not an exaggeration to say that. Now, there are people who will say, oh, we should have let it go a bit longer. That might be the case. I've watched this fight a few times, and I don't think Groves is absolutely out of it. Maybe it could have went another round. But I still think that none of us see what the referee sees. It may well be that the referee saw something in Groves' eyes or in his movement that we cannot see as fans, and he has a split second to make a choice there. And basically what comes down to is let the fight continue, maybe give Groves a chance to win the title if he turns it around, or essentially save a man's life by stopping it. No one will thank him for it, but that's the decision he makes. Now Froch, at the end of the fight, maybe he only said it because he won, but he basically backed the referee and said, look, I was throwing bombs at George Groves, and if I was in that position, I would want the referee to do the same thing. I'm not sure about that. I think every boxer wants to win. But what Froch was saying was, he's not a sadist. He didn't want to kill George Groves. He wanted to win the fight, but he didn't want to seriously damage his opponent. And when you have a professional boxer like Carl Froch throwing shots at you, at your head, unanswered, then really that is essentially, we're talking, if not life and death, then at least serious injury. If you think it's an exaggeration, look at Michael Watson. Look at Gerald McClellan. There's many examples. So it isn't an exaggeration to say that a referee has a man's life in his hands. And he knows that stopping it there and then will cost him popularity. He knows that. It's a bit like a politician making a hugely controversial decision, but at his core or her core knowing it is the right decision for the country, and sometimes they're right. So really I have some sympathy with the referee, because, and it pisses me off that people are so small-minded that they actually think that the price of their ticket is more important than the referee's call on a man's health. I mean, I could understand if this was a first round stoppage, because then it would be a waste of the fans' money and Groves would have been robbed of a chance. But this was towards the end of the fight. There had been a hell of a fight. I mean, all respect to Groves, he put up a hell of a fight. And of course he was bitterly disappointed, and he was as angry as the fans. But if the referee had stopped it the other way, and, stopped Froch from getting punishment, then the Froch fans would be reacting exactly the same way. So really, being a referee is an utterly thankless task. Now, I've heard people coming out and saying this is fraud, this is corruption, it was fixed, this sort of thing. I'm the first to admit that corruption exists in the world of boxing. But to slur this referee with that claim, I think is utterly baseless. Groves tried to say something about the referee liked a comment Froch made. That's a really, really flimsy piece of evidence to try and say that it was fixed. And I think it's slanderous as well. I think that was very unprofessional of George Groves to put that claim against a referee. I mean, maybe, Groves is a young man. It may well be years from now he will look back and think, actually, when he's retired years from now, he might look back and think, that referee actually possibly saved me serious brain damage. Now, let's be clear, these guys are both tough warriors, George Groves and Carl Froch. But just because they're boxers doesn't mean they can't be seriously damaged. And if you think that the price of your ticket is more important than a man's health, then you're a sick fuck, quite frankly. I mean, I don't know what the ticket was for that fight. Guessing over £100 ringside, maybe 50 quid for seats towards, but I don't know exactly. But whatever it was, it is not worth the price of a man's life, or at least his health. And if you think it is, you're a seriously sick fuck, quite frankly. Now, there wasn't the same controversy with the rematch. Froch won that, and both men were widely respected. That's good. But I'm looking at this first fight because of the controversy that erupted. To me, this highlights the sort of pressure that referees face. It's the same in football matches, and in football matches there's been examples of referees being physically attacked. I mean, I just can't comprehend the mentality of a sports fan of any sport that can want to physically attack a referee because of a decision, as if this affects their personal lives. It's pathetic, utterly pathetic. I mean, I can understand George Groves being angry and emotional because he's the one right in there. He's the one with a title on the stake, so I understand that. But from the fans, I'm not so sympathetic to them because I think they're just being callous, quite frankly. Do you really think that they have much compassion for George Groves? I don't think so. I think if they were real George Groves fans, they would at least consider the referee's decision. As far as I'm concerned, if you call yourself a George Groves fan, you won't demonise that referee. You'll step back and think, well, actually, maybe he saved our man from a serious beating. And that's not to discredit George Groves. He put up a hell of a fight, but there's no question about it in that particular round. I'm sorry, I forget what round it was, but in that particular round, he was taking a lot of unanswered shots. So, put yourself in the referee's position. It's an utterly thankless job, and someone has to do it. So, my message to boxing fans is, just consider that. Consider the decisions these guys have to make. Because it's utterly thankless, and someone has to do it. And in the end of the day, they have someone's life in their hands, essentially. I'm not saying corruption doesn't occur. I'm not saying there aren't crooked referees out there. But I do not think this was an example of that. I think this was an example of a compassionate referee who used his judgment to possibly save a man from serious injury. And I understand the atmosphere in a big boxing match is electric. I understand that. But it's still not an excuse to demonise the referee for making that sort of call. And respect to Froch for defending him because, well, I guess you're going to say that he won anyway, so he would defend the referee, but he made good points. He said that the guy was throwing bombs at George Groves. I could have seriously injured. I think it was 9 shots he threw unanswered. So the referee clearly took the decision to step in. You can argue it was the wrong decision, and you know what, maybe it was. Maybe Groves could have went another round. But the point is, the referee has to make a split decision. And if you're a real boxing fan, you'll at least consider that. Even if you're disappointed with that result, you'll at least consider that. That's all I'm saying. So from my perspective, I respect these guys. I respect the fact that they are in an essential role in a very tough sport, and it's thankless. And they deserve every penny they get.